It was the kind of rain that made the whole world feel heavier, relentless, soaking through coats and silence alike. At the far end of a narrow alley in Briar Creek, North Carolina, a young woman lay motionless beneath the flickering glow of a broken street lamp. Her name was Clara Monroe, her neck twisted unnaturally, hands clenched, mascara running in frozen streaks down her pale cheeks. The official report arrived quickly. Suicide. Detective Carl Redford didn't linger. He zipped up his coat, marked the case closed, and walked away as if he'd seen it all before. But someone else had been watching. A man standing just beyond the yellow tape, alone in the storm. His name was Elliot Warren, a quiet librarian with no badge, no authority, and no business being there. Yet, as he stared at Clara's body, something gnawed at him. The angle of her feet, the lack of drag marks, a faint smear of red beneath her fingernail. None of it made sense. And when no one else asked questions, he made a decision. If no one would find Clara's killer, he would, even if it meant pretending to be someone he wasn't. Before we uncover the truth they tried to bury, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This isn't just another crime story. It's one they never wanted told. Join a community that demands answers, defies silence, and never looks away. Don't miss what's coming next. It might change everything. Elliot Warren wasn't the kind of man people noticed. At 39, he lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store and spent his days working at the Briar Creek Public Library. His routine was as predictable as the ticking of a wall clock. Opening the library at 9, shelving returned books by 10, eating the same turkey sandwich at noon. He spoke little, kept his head down, and found his closest relationships between the pages of crime novels. But behind his quiet demeanor was a mind that rarely stopped turning. Elliot had once dreamed of becoming a police detective. He'd studied criminal psychology in college, obsessed over forensic documentaries, even applied to the academy twice. But chronic anxiety and a failed physical test shut that door. So instead, he surrounded himself with stories of justice. Fictional worlds where truth always came out and the hero always figured it out in time. In real life, however, Elliot felt invisible. The town barely knew him. He wasn't married, had no children, and hadn't spoken to his estranged sister in 5 years. His only regular human contact was the elderly woman who ran the coffee cart across the street and called him sweetheart, without ever asking his name. But something about Clara Monroe's death broke through his quiet little world. He had seen her before. Clara used to volunteer at the library on weekends, helping with children's story time. She was vibrant, thoughtful, and always asked about the mystery novels he stacked near the front. She didn't seem like someone ready to give up, and the more he thought about it, the more that night replayed in his head like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Why did the police close the case so quickly? Why was there no mention of the voicemail Clara had left her mother only 2 hours before her death? And why had Elliot noticed a smear of blood that wasn't in any of the official reports? He didn't know it yet, but Elliot was already crossing a line. A man used to silence, now chasing a scream only he could hear. And just beneath the surface of his quiet routine, something dangerous had begun to stir. The next morning, Elliot sat at his desk in the library, pretending to catalogue new arrivals while his mind churned with images from the night before. He couldn't stop thinking about Clara, not just her lifeless body, but the subtle wrongness of the scene. The staged way her arms had been positioned, the smear of blood beneath her fingernail, the absence of drag marks on the soaked pavement. Something about it haunted him in a way even his favorite detective novels never had. He didn't want to believe it was murder. He needed to, because if it was, then there was a truth hidden beneath the surface. And for the first time in years, Elliot felt alive. He began small. That afternoon, he walked to the police station pretending to be a concerned citizen. Just another quiet voice in a town that had already moved on. He asked for a copy of the incident report. The woman at the desk, bored and half listening, told him it wasn't public. "It's a suicide. Case is closed," she said, already moving on to her next task. But Elliot didn't move on. He dug through old newspaper clippings in the library archives, searched Clara's name online, scanned forums. Nothing explained why someone like her, bright and full of life, would end her own. No notes, no history of depression, and most curiously, no one really questioning the official story. It was like the town had been trained not to ask. Elliot started to keep a notebook. He scribbled times, locations, names. He tracked down one of Clara's friends, a barista named Hallie, who said Clara had been on edge the week before her death. She said something was going to blow up soon. Hallie whispered, her eyes darting toward the window. But I thought she was talking about work or politics, not this. The deeper Elliot dug, the more tangled things became. Clara had been involved in a local environmental initiative aimed at stopping a construction project funded by Monroe Development, her own family's company, and the man in charge, Jason Monroe, her older brother. Jason had given a heartfelt speech at Clara's vigil, full of tears and trembles, but Elliot had seen him outside that same night, laughing with two men in dark jackets. He remembered the exact angle of Jason's smirk. It didn't sit right. Still, Elliot knew what this looked like. A reclusive librarian playing detective. A man with no authority, no badge, no reason to believe he saw something the professionals missed. He started noticing people watching him at the library. A white SUV idling outside his apartment more than once. Phone calls that clicked and went silent the moment he answered, but his fear was quickly eclipsed by purpose. Elliot began carrying a tape recorder, just like the detectives in his favorite stories. He bought a used trench coat from a thrift shop downtown. He printed a fake badge, just enough to flash if someone questioned him. He wasn't impersonating a cop, he told himself. He was just investigating, because no one else would. Late one night, he broke into the alley where Clara had died. The yellow tape was long gone, but as he examined the wall behind where her body had been, he noticed something strange. A scuffed boot print on a pipe 2 feet off the ground, too high for Clara, who was barely over 5 feet tall, and it was recent. The tread hadn't been washed away by rain. Someone had climbed up. Or down. Was Clara trying to escape someone? Or was someone watching her? He took photos with his flip phone, added them to his folder of clues, and walked home with his heart pounding against his ribs. His stomach churned with a mixture of dread and resolve. He wasn't sure what he was becoming. Investigator, obsessive, or just another man desperate for purpose. But something told him this was bigger than he could imagine. And then came the envelope. No name, no return address. Slid under the door of his apartment during the night. Inside was a single photograph. It was Clara, taken from a distance. She was sitting at an outdoor cafe, head down, staring at her phone. And behind her, standing just barely in the frame, was Jason Monroe, smiling, watching her. On the back of the photo, in shaky black ink, were 4 words. She knew too much. Elliot stared at the image, fingers trembling. And for the first time, he realized he wasn't just chasing a theory anymore. He was chasing a killer. 3 days after receiving the anonymous photo, Elliot Warren stood on the sidewalk across from Monroe Construction's corporate office, his breath fogged in the cold morning air, his trench coat buttoned high, collar turned up. He didn't know what he was expecting to find. Maybe another sighting of Jason, maybe a reason to believe someone else had seen what he saw. But all he found was silence, and that same sinking feeling in his chest. That night, he called Clara's mother. Diane Monroe answered after the 5th ring, her voice hoarse and hollow. "I told the police everything I knew," she said, almost like a reflex. But when Elliot asked about the voicemail Clara had left before she died, her tone changed. "There was a message," Diane admitted, hesitant. "It came through at 8:17 p.m. She sounded scared. She said she had to talk to me about Jason, that she was going to expose something. Then the line cut off. I told the detective. He said it wasn't relevant. Elliot's blood went cold. That was the moment he realized it wasn't just that the police had ignored evidence. They had buried it. He asked Diane if he could hear the voicemail. She paused. "It's gone," she said. "My phone was stolen 2 days later, right out of my bag at the grocery store." Coincidence? Elliot didn't think so. The next morning, he visited the cafe where the photograph had been taken. The owner, an older man named Len, recognized Clara immediately. "She used to come in every week," he said. "Nice girl, always reading." Elliot asked about the day the photo was taken. Len squinted, thinking. "That day. Yeah, I remember. She came in, looked nervous, was meeting someone but they never showed. Left her coffee untouched, sat there for nearly an hour before rushing out like she was late for something." He paused, then added, "Funny thing, 2 men in suits came in right after, asked if we had security footage." "Did you give it to them?" Elliot asked. "They said they were police, showed badges, took the hard drive and left." Elliot didn't say a word. He just nodded and walked out. That night, he couldn't sleep. Something wasn't adding up. Clara had been preparing to expose her brother. She had evidence, or at least the intention to make something public, and then she was dead. The voicemail disappeared. The footage vanished. And the police were treating the entire case like a minor inconvenience. It was time to stop observing from the sidelines. He needed to act. 2 nights later, Elliot broke into the Monroe estate. It was reckless, desperate, and probably insane. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were inside. The mansion was massive, perched at the edge of the woods, surrounded by wrought iron fencing and motion lights. Jason was out of town that weekend, according to a source Elliot had bribed at the front desk of a local hotel. He slipped through a side entrance using a tool he'd fashioned from a coat hanger. Inside, it was silent. Cold, the kind of silence that presses against your skin like static. He searched Jason's office first. Mahogany shelves, sleek black desk, modern art that clashed with the room's old-world decor. At first, nothing. Then he found it. A locked drawer. Inside, beneath business ledgers and property plans, was a slim USB drive taped beneath the top panel. Elliot pocketed it and turned to leave. That's when he heard the click. A slow, deliberate metallic sound. The front door. Someone was home. He froze. Listened. Footsteps. Heart-pounding, Elliot ducked into a coat closet, holding his breath so tight his chest hurt. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped outside the office. A phone rang. Jason's voice, clear, confident, unaware of the man hiding 10 feet from him, answered. "Yeah, no, it's handled. She's gone. It's been a week and no one's asking questions. The idiot librarian, he's harmless. If he pokes too much, we'll shut him down. I've got it under control." Silence. "Then no one's going to connect her to the land deal. We wiped everything. Phones, computers, even her mother's files. She didn't make a move in time." Elliot's hand trembled over the doorknob. His vision blurred from adrenaline. Jason walked away. 10 minutes later, Elliot slipped out the back door and ran until his lungs gave out. Back at his apartment, he locked every window, pulled the shades tight, and stared at the USB. What was on it? Why had Jason kept it? He plugged it into his old laptop. Inside were 5 folders, one labeled Q3 Budgets, another Campaign Support, the third, Clara. Elliot opened it. Dozens of files, emails, audio recordings, a video. He clicked play. Clara sat in front of her laptop, tears in her eyes, speaking directly into the camera. "If anything happens to me, it's because I found out what Jason's doing. He's buying land through proxies, getting permits approved using false data. He's poisoning the groundwater to lower property values so he can buy them for cheap, and I have proof." The screen went black. Elliot exhaled. She had tried to stop him. She had fought back, and she had paid for it with her life. But now, so would he. Because this wasn't just a cover-up, it was a conspiracy. And Elliot Warren had just become the only man who could bring it all down. Elliot didn't sleep that night. He watched Clara's video over and over again, rewinding every detail, listening for anything that might have been missed. Her voice cracked in the same place every time. If anything happens to me, it wasn't a cry for help. It was a prediction. By morning, Elliot had copied the files to 2 different flash drives and mailed one anonymously to a local journalist, Maggie Torres. She was known in Briar Creek for pushing boundaries and publishing stories that made the mayor's office uncomfortable. If anyone would take this seriously, it would be her. He included a note. If I disappear, look into Monroe Development. Start with the Clara Monroe folder. Then he started making a list. People Clara had mentioned in her emails, contractors, inspectors, lawyers. He wasn't just chasing a murderer anymore, he was chasing a machine. His first stop was the county records office. He posed as a freelance researcher using a fake badge he printed online. A young clerk let him browse public zoning files without asking too many questions. What Elliot found was disturbing. Permits had been approved for Monroe development projects on land previously flagged for contamination, land Clara had tried to protect. He photographed everything. One name came up repeatedly, Tom Griffin, a retired county inspector who had signed off on several of Jason's more controversial developments. Elliot tracked him down in a nearby town and paid him a visit. Griffin lived alone in a worn-down house that smelled of cigarette smoke and despair. He was jittery from the moment Elliot introduced himself. "I don't want trouble," Griffin muttered. "I did what I was told. That's all." "Told by who?" Griffin's eyes darted to the window. "Jason, his people. They offered money, sure. But when I pushed back, my brakes failed 2 days later. That was the warning. After that, I signed whatever they put in front of me." Did Clara know?" Griffin hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She came here once. She begged me to go public. I said no. A week later, she was dead." Elliot felt sick. He thanked Griffin and left. But as he walked back to his car, he noticed a black sedan parked half a block down. Same car he'd seen outside his apartment. Inside, a man with sunglasses stared straight ahead, unmoving. Elliot didn't go home that night. Instead, he checked into a motel under a false name and kept his phone off. He couldn't risk leading anyone to the files, or to himself. The next morning, Maggie Torres called. "I got your package," she said. "I've seen a lot in this town, but this is different. What exactly are you into, Elliot?" He told her everything. She listened in silence, then said, "Okay, I'm in. But you need to be careful. If this is real, they won't let it go public without a fight." Over the next week, Maggie and Elliot worked in secret. She verified documents, interviewed former Monroe development employees, dug into campaign contributions and anonymous shell companies. Everywhere they looked, the trail led back to Jason. But something didn't fit. Clara's files had a gap, a missing piece. She referenced a whistleblower, someone inside the company who had promised her access to internal records, but their name wasn't in any file. Elliot followed the only lead he had, an email handle, WRook19. He searched through Clara's contacts. No match. Then Maggie remembered something. There was a subcontractor named William Rooker. He worked security for Monroe's properties. Disappeared last year after a workplace accident. No obituary. No funeral. Elliot's pulse quickened. He tracked down Rooker's last known address, a rundown trailer outside city limits. Inside, dust-covered furniture and old newspapers. But in a closet, buried beneath blankets, he found a hidden safe. The lock had been broken, and the inside was empty. Too late. Whoever Rooker was, he had vanished, and someone had cleaned up after him, but not perfectly. Under the floorboard near the safe, Elliot found a single, weathered photo. It showed Clara, Rooker, and Jason Monroe, together at a company party, all smiling. On the back someone had written, "He gave her the key." Elliot's mind raced. The missing piece wasn't just another file. It was someone who knew the entire operation from the inside and trusted Clara enough to help her. But now, both were gone. That night, Maggie called again. "I ran the metadata on the video Clara recorded," she said. "It was filmed at 8:04 p.m. She died around 8:30, so we're missing 26 minutes. Exactly. A window of time no one could account for." They dug deeper, scanning phone records, GPS pings, surveillance footage, anything that could track Clara's movements that night. And that's when they found it. A grainy traffic camera image. Clara's car turning onto Route 6, opposite the direction of her home. Timestamp 8:17 p.m. The same time she left the voicemail for her mother. She was headed somewhere else, but where? That became Elliot's obsession. He retraced the route, drove the same path, counted the turns, the landmarks, the service roads, and then he saw it, an abandoned gas station. Boarded up, no signs, no activity. But as he walked around the back, he saw the door had been recently opened. Inside, empty shelves, scattered debris, and in one corner the unmistakable glint of something metallic, a hidden camera, still intact. He pulled it from the wall and took it back to the motel. It was password protected, but Maggie knew someone who could crack it. They waited. 2 hours later, the footage loaded, and what they saw changed everything. At 8:24 p.m., Clara's car pulled into the back lot. She got out, looked around, then a black SUV arrived. Jason Monroe stepped out. They argued. Clara pointed, shouted. Jason shoved her. She fell, hit her head, blood. He panicked, dragged her to the car and drove away. Maggie paused the video. "Jesus, we have him." Elliot stared at the screen, his hands shaking. This was it. Proof. But how do you take down a man who owns the town? If any part of this story has made you stop and think, even for a second, leave a like and share your thoughts below. Your voice matters more than you think. Stories like Clara's deserve to be heard, remembered and questioned. Maybe your comment is the one that keeps the truth alive. Maggie stared at the paused video. Her jaw clenched. Elliot sat beside her in the dim motel room, the only light coming from the glow of the laptop screen. It was the proof they had been chasing, the moment that changed everything. Jason Monroe, in full view, shoving Clara Monroe to the ground. A fall, a thud, the spreading pool of red. Then silence. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. The footage continued to play silently. Jason pacing, panicked, looking around before dragging Clara's limp body into the back seat of his SUV. No hesitation, no grief, only fear of being caught. Maggie finally broke the silence. This isn't just manslaughter. He didn't call for help. He didn't check her pulse. He just cleaned it up. Elliot's hands trembled. He knew exactly what he was doing. The video timestamp matched perfectly with the window of Clara's death. It confirmed her voicemail, her fear, her urgency. But it did something else. It exposed Jason not only as a killer, but as a man who believed he was untouchable. And maybe he was. They both knew the footage wasn't enough on its own. If they released it without strategy, it could be buried just like Clara's message, just like Rooker, just like everything else. "He'll say it's fake," Maggie said, "that it's deep fake technology, that you doctored it. We need someone inside, someone who can't be ignored." It was a dangerous idea, but Maggie had a contact at the state attorney general's office, someone she trusted, someone who owed her a favor. By midnight she had arranged a meeting in Raleigh. They'd leave at dawn, but dawn never came. At 3:17 a.m., the motel door shook violently. Someone was trying to break in. Elliot bolted upright. Maggie grabbed the flash drive and shoved it into her bag. The door cracked. Elliot grabbed a chair, wedged it under the handle, and kicked open the bathroom window. They climbed out, barefoot, into the freezing night air. The car was parked 2 blocks down. They ran like fugitives. Behind them, they heard the door finally give way. By the time whoever it was reached the room, it was empty. They drove straight through the night, heartbeats in their ears, headlights like interrogation lamps on every turn. At 7:42 a.m., they handed the flash drive to Assistant Attorney General Nina Caldwell. She watched the video in full silence. Then she looked up and said just one word: "Jesus." Caldwell moved fast. She authorized a sealed investigation, assembled a task force, and promised Elliot and Maggie protection. But even with all that, she warned them, if this leaks before we're ready, he'll vanish. People like Jason don't get scared, they get surgical. Over the next 2 weeks, investigators quietly built the case. Financial records, zoning corruption, campaign fraud, and finally, conspiracy to cover up murder. But just as the pieces were aligning, Caldwell called with devastating news. Jason Monroe had fled. Hours before they were set to move in, he boarded a private plane using a diplomatic loophole through a shell company registered in Panama. No customs, no exit stamp. He was gone. And just like that, the case threatened to fall apart. The video became the center of a media firestorm. Leaked by someone inside the AG's office, it flooded every news outlet in the country. Public outrage exploded. Clara Monroe didn't jump. Real estate empire built on blood. Hashtags, vigils, protesters. But Jason was still gone. For Elliot, it felt like failure. He had risked everything, his safety, his sanity, his quiet life, and the man responsible had slipped away without consequence until the envelope arrived. Again, no return address. Inside, a grainy surveillance still. Jason sitting in a cafe in Vienna, and a handwritten note. He can't hide forever. The note was signed simply, W.R. William Rooker, the ghost. The missing whistleblower wasn't missing after all. He was watching, helping, and maybe, just maybe, hunting. Elliot showed the image to Caldwell. She widened her eyes. He's alive? He's the reason Clara had that USB. He's the key. Caldwell nodded slowly. Then we find him, and we bring Jason back. With Interpol involved and an active international warrant, things started moving again. Slowly, carefully. Elliot remained under protection. And Maggie, now a national figure, continued exposing every layer of the Monroe web. And through it all, one question lingered in Elliot's mind. Why had Rooker come out of hiding now? The answer arrived in a second envelope. Inside, a voice recording. Rooker, tired and resolute, speaking into what sounded like a hotel phone. I gave Clara everything. I trusted her, and she died because I waited too long. But Warren didn't. He saw what they buried, and he kept going. That matters. If this ever gets to you, don't stop. You're the only ones left. Elliot played the message twice. Then a third time. Something shifted in him. He had started all this pretending to be a detective. Now he realized he was one. He didn't have a badge. He didn't carry a gun. But he had done what no one else had dared. He asked questions. He didn't look away. And because of that, Clara's voice had been heard, loud enough to shake a country. The final update came on a rainy Thursday morning. Interpol confirmed Jason Monroe had been arrested at a private compound in the Austrian Alps. He was being extradited under charges of manslaughter, obstruction of justice, racketeering, and conspiracy. The machine was finally breaking, and it had started with a man the world had forgotten. A man who chose not to stay silent. The courtroom was packed. Press, protesters, lawyers, Clara's mother, everyone who had followed the case waited in breathless silence as Jason Monroe was led in, flanked by U.S. Marshals. He looked thinner, his once polished appearance now worn down by months in custody and the weight of evidence stacked against him. Elliot sat in the back row, anonymous among the crowd. He didn't speak to the cameras, didn't give interviews. He just watched as justice, long overdue, finally began to unfold. Jason pleaded not guilty, but the evidence, Clara's video, the gas station footage, Rooker's testimony was overwhelming. He was convicted on all counts. The moment the verdict was read, Diane Monroe broke down. Elliot wanted to say something, to comfort her, but he didn't. Some grief can't be softened. Some justice, even when served, still leaves a hole that never quite closes. Jason received 35 years in federal prison without parole. It wasn't enough to bring Clara back, but it was something. The fallout from the case rippled across the state. Multiple resignations, investigations into Monroe Development's holdings, corruption exposed at every level. Briar Creek would never be the same, and neither would Elliot. He returned to the library, but not to disappear. He began hosting a weekly reading group focused on true crime and civic awareness. Teenagers, retirees, former skeptics, they all came, drawn by the man who had once shelved books in silence and ended up shaking the foundation of an empire. Maggie Torres published a best-selling book about the case, dedicating it to Elliot and Clara. She offered him co-author credit. He declined. "This was never about me," he told her, but he kept a copy. Page 1 bore Clara's words, "If anything happens to me," Elliot never forgot them. He often walked by the cafe where she'd sat that day, now renamed Clara's Place. A plaque outside told her story. Children played near it, unaware of the storm that once swirled around that quiet corner of town. And sometimes, late at night, Elliot still received unmarked letters, photos, updates, notes from Rooker. The whistleblower had vanished again, but not without watching over the aftermath. One note stood out above the rest. "You turned fiction into justice. Never stop asking why." It reminded Elliot of who he used to be, a man hiding in fiction, hoping to find truth in someone else's story. Now he knew better. Truth doesn't always come easy. It doesn't always wear a badge. And sometimes it's up to ordinary people, librarians, reporters, forgotten whistleblowers, to keep asking the questions that no one else dares. Clara Monroe was gone, but her voice, her fight, her truth, those lived on. And Elliot Warren, once invisible, had become something more powerful than he ever imagined. He had become seen. What would you have done if you were Elliot? Would you have walked away after seeing the police dismiss Clara's death as a suicide? Would you have convinced yourself it wasn't your problem? Or would you have followed the truth, no matter where it led? Elliot Warren wasn't a cop. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't someone anyone expected to become a hero. But sometimes all it takes is one person asking the question no one else will. If this story moved you, we want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Jason would have ever been caught if Elliot hadn't stepped in? Was justice really served? Drop your theories in the comments. Share this video with someone who believes one voice can make a difference. And if you want more real stories like this, stories of courage, of truth, of ordinary people doing the impossible, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next story we tell might just change the way you see the world. And remember, the truth doesn't hide forever, but sometimes it needs someone brave enough to chase it.